Okay. Well, I am impressed that I put 4:15 on the presentation and everyone shuts up and sits down at 4:15. That is, on the screen here, it says 4:15. I do believe in the value of negative space where people get a chance to actually to talk and to connect, because connection is where action happens. Just a little bit about Commonwealth North. We are a policy discussion group. Our board of directors, 3 or 4 who are here today. We got Diane Hirschberg, Jennifer Johnston, John Katchen, who's our facilitator. Anyone else? So Kai Binkley, obviously. And we represent, the board of directors represent a huge stretch of Alaska, from resource development to telecommunication to university to lobbying to city management, clergy, native corporations, the whole gamut. And the one area that we are all concerned about is what can we do to make Alaska a better place for Alaskans. So this is kind of the Venn diagram of where Commonwealth North is. It's like we work where the members have interest, and it's in an area that benefits Alaskans. And how today's forum came about was a member came up to me and said, I think that Alaska really needs to have this conversation about pensions. And she laid the groundwork for what that conversation might look like, and working together, we came up with today's forum. So if you are interested, I do urge you all to become members of Commonwealth North, because like, as I said, we make connection happen, and within connection, that's where action begins. Just a couple quotes here. Does anyone know who said these famous Alaskan quotes? Yeah. Well, the truth is, every Alaskan has said this, but no Alaskan ever got famous by saying this, right? We've all said this at some time, but Commonwealth North is here to actually help people from stop saying this and to start taking action and to start moving things forward. I want to say a big thank you to NEA Alaska. Without them, this event wouldn't be free. We wouldn't have live streaming. It wouldn't be recorded at the quality that it is. So a big round of applause to NEA Alaska. Thank you guys so much for your support. And also thank you to our cornerstone members, ConocoPhillips and GCI. So while you guys, if you want, I would suggest that you take out your phones now and you get this phone number up on your texting, because if there is a question that you want to ask later, this is how we are going to be receiving them. It's not through Zoom on the conversation. It's right here. So if you're on Zoom or if you're here live in person, get this number on your cell phone and be prepared to ask questions by texting. We will show this slide again later, okay? Some upcoming events. Our next event is our annual awards gala, where we honor John Binkley and Gloria O'Neill for their distinguished work in public policy and leadership and visionary community making. It's on October 23rd. I promise you, it's not going to be a boring awards gala. We will have music from the people who do the Candlelight Quartet. You guys are familiar with? They play modern classics with a string quartet. It's fantastic. The programming is going to be a lot quicker, so people won't talk for hours. It's going to be a very nice, fun event where you actually get to talk to people and have a good time honoring some distinguished Alaskans. We also have, after that, at the Anchorage Museum, you can register for this today. We're having different superintendents from Alaska talk about triumphs, trials, and transformations, basically the successes, challenges, and initiatives that they are implementing in their district. Should be really interesting. And the TBD at the very end has just been announced. That is going to be the Fairbanks North Star Bureau. Sorry. And then finally, on our, if one way of, once again, with connection and action, one of our annual events is on December 4th. That's where you have an opportunity to meet with state legislators in a more intimate area where you get to ask them questions and they get to ask you questions. So it's a really great opportunity to really get to know the people who are making decisions on behalf of Alaskans without having to travel to Juneau to do that. Without further ado, I would like to introduce your moderator today, which is John Katchen. John Katchen is a board member of Commonwealth North and a partner at Holland & Hart.
Thank you, Ross. And thank you all for coming today to this really important event. It's a timely debate on a critical issue facing the state, which is the challenge of retaining and recruiting state employees. To respond to this challenge, last session, the House approved House Bill 78, which, to briefly summarize, and it's a complicated bill, but had 3 or 4 major components. One is it created a new defined benefit pension system. Second, it provides guaranteed retirement benefits with employee contributions. And then the bill excludes health benefits to try to enhance the fiscal sustainability. And today, to provide different perspectives on House Bill 78 and pension reform, we have a great panel, a great group of folks. Representative Chuck Cott, who's from District 10 here in Anchorage. Representative Will Stapp from District 32 up in Fairbanks. Brock Wilson, who's a PhD at ICER at UAA. And Justin Mack, who's chair of the Alaska Professional Firefighters Association. The format for today's discussion is each panel will have around 9 minutes to share their perspective on pension reform and HB 78. After the presentation, we'll have the Q&A session and with hopefully your questions. And without further ado, I'll introduce or turn the mic over to Representative Kopp. Thank you.
Well, good afternoon, everybody. As we're getting the slideshow ready to go here, just want to thank everybody for coming and our host tonight. It's a real privilege to have this discussion, and I appreciate my colleague in the House, Representative Stapp, being here. So House Bill 78 is a House Finance Committee bill that was introduced to strengthen our well-known recruitment retention challenge. Every year when the governor rolls out his annual budget, all the commissioners list their top concern, which is recruitment and retention of their employees, the hollowing out of their agencies, and people leaving in a short turn and burn cycle of 2 to 3 years, causing huge problems executing their mission. So what do we do about it? Well, we looked at where we've been, how do we get here? In 2002, not many people are attuned to this. Our pension system, our legacy system, was well funded. If you go to the Division of Retirement and Benefits website, it'll show you historically, up till 2002, we were at 101%, 99%, 104%, going back a dozen years. It was a very strong pension system. So what happened in 2002? We had an actuary, Mercer, who, I'll just say it, they lied to the state. I think initially it was a mistake, but when they discovered it, they didn't tell us. The actuary is the finance entity that tells you what your contribution should be to balance your future liabilities with your contributions to make sure that your fund is valuated. When the state was first told that we were in trouble, we were 3 years into it. And we had been severely under-contributing or not contributing. I mean, what local government would rejoice to not have to have money go toward a retirement system and put it towards roads or schools or sewers? And they jumped right on that. But that set us back. You can read the lawsuit, State of Alaska versus Mercer. It set us back 1.8 to 2.8 billion was the Department of Law's numbers. The time value of that money today, 7.25% interest rate to modern date, is almost $6 billion. $6 billion of liability that we still struggle with today because of that suit. But the state reacted, I think, too far, and we ended up changing it out of our system rather than fixing it, which we did by hiring 3 actuaries to make sure that would never happen again. 1 to verify the state actuary and 1 for the Alaska Retirement Management Board. Next slide. Oops, I have this clicker. I have the clicker. I'm the next slide. He'll go this way. Okay, what's happening now with our legacy system, which I am not trying to defend. I am an entirely different system, but I just wanted to show our legacy system has gone from 2014 being only 54.5% funded for PERS to 72.5% funded today, and TERS 48% funded to 82.5% funded. That trajectory keeps us on a goal of entirely paying off our legacy pension system debt by 2039. And this year, the ARM board passed a resolution saying they are not going to layer debt beyond 2039. They're going to do shorter term notes to keep it on the 2039 layout. So that's good. They doubled down on that. And this chart just shows what the funding is every year. Next slide shows what our returns are doing. 2024, we had a 9.1% overall return. The actuary said, let's look at 7.25. They beat that benchmark. 2025, the unaudited return looks like it's going to be about 10.5%. They absolutely killed it. So kudos to our Department of Revenue people who help invest those funds. Now, what is the cost of doing what we're doing now? Remember I said the commissioners are worried about turnover and having to cover those positions? This shows in FY20, we spent $85 million in overtime, holiday pay, on-call premiums, letters of agreement, where you're hiring people in at a much higher pay than that job class otherwise justifies just to get them to take the job. In 5 years, we are on track for $160 million. So doubling it in 5 years. This is a huge number. This is the cost. I call it the high tax of turnover. People leaving, we're now spending $160 million a year. What is the price of House Bill 78? The actuaries say it'll cost the state $37 million a year in additional state contributions going forward. Pretty much a flat line, and they don't see any unfunded liability being introduced as a result of this bill. They said it several times on the record. What is it doing to our employee as far as how they're handling their retirement accounts? They are cashing them out. This slide shows that in 7 months, they cashed out $349 million of their PERS and TERS, their public employee or their teacher contributions, or $500 million if you count their supplemental annuity accounts and their deferred compensation. 90% of these withdrawals are happening at the 5-year mark. What happens at 5 years? You get your employer contributions and your employee, and you go, and you go. And the next slide shows they are going. This is where our workforce is. Most of our workforce is right here in 3 to 4 years and under. And look at how it narrows down as you get older. Unless you're an old guy and you have a pension, then you stay in. So we got the high turnover, and there's our job workforce profile from the Executive Branch Department of Administration to show it. So what are we doing? We're looking at a proposed solution with this. It's a competitive, responsible retirement plan that's modeled on what a number of states are doing that are all funded 100% or higher. And you'll see those. Another presenter actually bring that up. It's a shared risk with employees. Employees, the employer, and the retirees all share. The old system, all the risk was on the employer, and that's what you hear people being concerned about. This is totally different, that everybody has skin in the game, and we believe it is a strategic investment in the workforce. How is it a shared risk? The employer contribution is movable. It can go from 8% of their payroll to 12%. Depending on the market returns, the plan is required to stay funded at a 90% or higher valuation. If it doesn't, your contribution goes up. What happens to the employer contribution? They stay capped at 22% if you're local government, if you're Muni of Anchorage or Fairbanks or anybody, 22% for PERS, 12.5% for TERS, but we put a floor down here. So if we had a bad actuary tell us you don't have to make a contribution again, we'd say no. We're still making a minimum contribution. And this is, by the way, what the actuary says they think the true cost of the plan is when it's paid off. The old legacy system is House Bill 78 will be around 11 or 12% of payroll. So we're not changing any effect for local government. and we're going to stay on track to pay off the legacy debt. What else has changed? We kept 5 years vesting for public employees. If you're a heavy equipment operator, a regular PERS employee, and 5 years for teachers. We aligned them up for both. Teachers used to be 8 years. We aligned them both for ease of use, ease of projection. And for TERS and PERS, what's it take to retire? You have to be at least 60 years of age with 5 years of service, or 30 years of age, and then you can retire. So either you do 30 years and out, or 60 years if you've had at least 5 years. For PERS public safety, 50 years old with 25 years of service, or 55 with 20 years of service. Why is that shorter? Medical liability of those professions, very high risk, 300 to 500% more chance of a career-ending injury in those professions. So the structure, you say retirees have skin in the game. This shows that there is no COLA, no cost of living allowance. In the old system, when you turn 65, you got 10% of your base salary, a bump. That's not in House Bill 78 because it costs too much. So the retirees aren't happy about that, but we're not messing with the old system. If you're an old person, don't worry, we're not taking your retirement, okay? We're not taking that away from you, but going forward, we took it out. The post-retirement pension adjustment, that's the inflation perfection. That's the 1.5% a year, basically half of whatever the consumer price index is. That can be removed if the plan doesn't stay funded at 90% or more. So this coverage of medical care is consistent with the current system that employees are now in. Not a great plan, but it gives them a health retirement account, and this says how it's funded. 3% of total payroll to PERS, and the only exception is for public safety, it's 4%. The employees have 180 days to opt in. If this bill passes, they have 180 days to make a choice to come out of the defined contribution plan, which is a 401k type, into a defined benefit plan. New employees would be enrolled in a defined benefit plan. What does Alaska think about this? Statewide surveys say most Alaskans are for this. They recognize we have to do something to improve our competitiveness. Internally, Department of Public Safety just polled their members, 458 members, 83% say we need a defined benefit plan. The economic savings of this are at $73 million per year. That is the minimum estimate. Remember I said it costs $37 million a year. That's what the actuary says. The economists say a minimum of $76 million because of the critically savings in training costs and lost work hours. You saw the cost of doing nothing slide where I showed it was $160 million a year. That's what we're paying now, $160 million a year in overtime, and it's going up. It's an investment in Alaska. It's a good investment. It gives us a choice. And we're confident because of how this is modeled against other states that have very strong pension systems that we are going to leave Alaska in a better place and be more competitive as an employer again, strengthen our public safety, our transportation system, and our education system. So that I wrapped it up right there. This is something that normally, takes hours to hash out in committee meetings, but just gave you a very high-level overview, and I appreciate you guys hanging with me. I know it's a lot real quick, but that's the format. Yeah. Right.
And Chuck, one last note, you're not supposed to criticize the host about their format.
Was I critical?
Oh, I'm going to criticize it too.
Yeah. Right. So. Here you go, sir. You can use the space bar or.
Oh, okay. Is it is right clicker? Yeah. Okay, well, thanks. I'm going to echo my friend Representative Kopp's comments. It's really hard to do this in 9 minutes, but I'm going to do the best I can. So my name's Will. I'm going to tell you two things right off the bat. Number one, better benefits cost more money. Okay, remember that. Better benefits cost more money. And number two, I'm going to go through a lot of these features of HB 78, and I'm going to ask you a simple question. If these are questions that we want to answer, if it makes sense, we should have the answers before we pass the bill. Okay, because no, it's a one-door decision and you can't ever go back because of the state's constitution. So if these questions make sense, we should have the answers to them. Okay, so Warren Buffett says risks comes from not knowing what you're doing. And as you're going to see throughout my presentation, a lot of people took a lot of risk because they didn't know what they were doing, and it has a lot more to do than just Mercer. Okay, so a lot of things have been said about this bill. HB 78 is not a return to the past. It's a carefully designed and protects the state from yesterday's mistakes. Certainly a different bill than what we had before, but I'm going to argue that we're repeating some of the same mistakes at the legislature, and I'm going to demonstrate to you, and I'm going to say it makes sense for us not to do that. The second thing is the plan is shared risk and financially sound. Certainly has features of shared risk, but when it comes to financially sound, the answer is we don't know. And the reason is we haven't bothered to model that yet. So I would argue that it makes sense to model that. And the third thing is the DC plan is a failed experiment. And of course, my colleague knows that these are all quotes from him. Illustrious job. Folks, if you think the DC plan is a failed experiment, you better not replace it unintentionally with something that might be worse. Because I don't know what is worse than failure, but if the plan is worse, it probably is that. So the real question is, how did we get here? Okay, so I'm going to play you a conversation from back in 2005, 20 years ago, when we decided to move away from this plan from Senate Finance.
I guess my question is, if we have the obligation today is a finite amount, $5.7 billion, for budgetary purposes, why wouldn't we have a fixed rate over time?
You could. What they do is they amortize that out over 25 years at 8.25%. But every year as you go along, you're either going to have a good year or a bad year, so it keeps, the target keeps moving on you a little bit.
Well, it's moving anyway, because you said that we can't pinpoint the exact time that it's going to be paid off as it is.
Correct. Because we don't know what the future returns on the portfolio are going to be, or the future normal costs issues, and also all the assumptions that the actuary uses. So we can expect our liabilities to expand a year from now. We'll be sitting in, it should be somewhere at 6.1, 6.2 billion.
Okay, what do we hear about that back in 2005, folks? We were supposed to have an 8.25% return that was going to pay off the debt in 25 years. Guess what didn't happen? That, remotely close to that. You heard them talk about how we didn't know what future returns and future costs will be, but we could expect our unfunded liability on our existing pension plan to be $6.1 to $6.2 billion. And we had $12.6 billion in total liabilities on PERS and TERS. And most importantly, it was a moving target. Well, folks, 20 years later, what happened? Oh, our liability is actually $25 billion. That's double what it was 20 years ago. That's a heck of a moving target. And despite billions and billions in additional contributions of state and local government, our existing pension liability is higher than it was 20 years ago. It's $7.2 billion today. Okay, why is that? How could we have been so wrong? And by the way, Senator Stedman and Senator Hoffman are incredibly conservative people, and they operate under the assumptions that they had the day. Those assumptions turn to be wildly inaccurate. Why is that? All right, because the problems that you have with long-term liabilities and pensions stem from a few things. Number one, investment experience changes in actuarial assumptions. Okay, what does that mean? Folks, this is a chart of every single pension plan in the entire country. Okay, so when you hear that our plan was funded in 2002 and that somehow Mercer made a mistake and now it's not funded, guess what, folks? There's $1.3 trillion in unfunded liabilities across every single pension plan in this country, and Mercer didn't do that. Okay, why did that happen? Well, here are the reasons. Number one, investment experience. What's that mean? That means we thought we were going to make way more money than we did. Second thing is expected changes and assumption changes. Assumption changes are when your actuary says, like they do right now with TERS, we're only going to have 1% payroll growth in teachers. Guess what? I'm pretty sure teachers are going to do a lot better than 1% per year. Okay, what's the major problem with the bill right now as written? It's a thing called the discount rate. What's a discount rate? Discount rate is basically the cost of the future benefits for employees buying in now. So keep in mind, under this bill, all of our existing employees, they got to purchase that pension. Okay, and the percent or rate of return, the discount rate that you use, matters a lot because you're buying future benefits. Okay. So when we talk about comparing this discount rate to every other state that does pensions well, note two things. One, the national average of all discount rates is 6.86%. That is substantially lower than what we are using. And if you model this with every well-funded pension plan in the country, Tennessee, Utah, Washington, Wisconsin, the same things that we say we are modeling this bill off, every single state uses a lower discount rate than we are using in our bill. Folks, what happens if that 7.25% goes down after everyone buys in? You immediately create a liability in the plan, which means your employer contribution has to go up, your employee contribution has to go up, and heaven forbid the retiree loses their post-retirement pension adjustment, because that'll be a big deal here later. Okay? The third thing, payroll and salary growth, cost projections. Okay, this is from Ledge Finance. I had this model that. I think it makes sense to model these things. Currently, the ARM board uses 2% payroll growth in PERS and 1% payroll growth in TERS, and that's how we arrive at these numbers. When you modify those numbers a little bit, even a little bit, and you monitor 4% change in salary growth for employees rather than 1%, you're going to find that this bill ends up running you almost $2 billion after 20 years. Okay, folks, pensions are good things. If you think this bill is still good and you're willing to pay $1.8 billion over 20 years, hey, that makes sense. But the voters of the state need to know that, and people making these decisions need to know that, which is why it's important that we decide that we're going to try to model our best and our worst case scenarios and decide on a decision going forward. I mentioned earlier about the liabilities on the plan. As you can see on this chart, relatively simple. In 2013, we had $12 billion in pension liability for PERS, okay? In 2023, 10 years later, it was 16, almost 17 billion. How did that happen? Well, it turns out our employees' salaries grew way faster than what we modeled. And when that happens, you owe more money. Because guess what? Better benefits cost more money. So how good is this plan actually, and why not study alternatives? I think we should want to know that before we did that. So here's the Equitable Institute in New York compared our pension plan to our DC plan for teachers, public safety officers, and everyone else, and I'm having this handed out to you right now. And remember how I talked about that discount rate could get you in trouble if you use the wrong number? Well, if you use the wrong number, your inflation adjustment, your PRPA goes away. And when your PRPA goes away, it turns out the plan's actually worse than staying in your DC plan. Because if you have 20 years of a plan that's less than 90% funded, that means you get no change in your pay for 20 years of retirement. Okay, 65 grand might sound great right now, but I guarantee you 20 years from now, it probably is not going to buy a whole lot. So finally, how do we fix these things? Well, I would say it would make sense if we modeled these variables and we actually stress test the bill. We haven't done that. So let's do that. The second thing is model the bill mechanics. What actually happens if you got to increase employer contribution? How much does that cost? Well, it would make sense to know that. I mean, we don't know that right now, so why don't we model it? The third thing is plan accordingly. Folks, if you want better benefits, understand that you might have to pay more money, and the only way that that's going to work out in the long term is if you plan accordingly. Articulate how to deal with different outcomes in these scenarios. Not everything is going to be the same as the past. Some things are going to do better and some things are going to do worse, okay? But it makes sense to actually know that, hey, if you're a teacher and you retire, like there is a chance that's less than zero that you might not have any change in your salary for a decade or 2 decades, okay? Finally, look at alternatives to comparisons to see if this is actually the best path forward. Folks, we haven't done that in the legislature. Okay, maybe the pension is the best option. Maybe enhancing the DC plan is the best option. Maybe putting folks in Social Security is the best option. I don't know what any of those options is because we haven't bothered to look at them. And it would kind of make sense if we decided to actually compare the different types of options going forward. And finally, ask yourself this question: who will pay the price if we're wrong? So let me tell you something. If I am right and you use a lower discount rate when the employees buy in, do you know what happens? What happens is when a teacher or a public safety officer retires, their pension plan is overfunded. So you know what you can do if it's overfunded? You could give the retiree better benefits when they're actually retired. Okay, because remember, in this state, we can only do one thing, which is enhance. We can't ever take away. So if you got more money than you need, you can enhance the plan. But guess what? If you're wrong and your plan's underfunded, and you look at the experience on our existing PERS and TERS, you could go 20 years without any change in your retirement income. So my argument to you folks is it makes sense to err on the side of caution, and that's what we should do going forward. Thanks.
Dr. Brock Wilson.
Perfect. This way to go left or to go next?
No, it's the Facebook as well.
Okay. I don't know what's going on now.
Oh,
Huh.
you have to do it, shoot from the hip.
There we go. Okay. Oh. Did I press the wrong? There we go. There we go. Hi, all. Thank you guys for having me today. I first want to say a big thank you to my colleague, Noah Burke. He's a research professional at the Institute of Social and Economic Research, and he's been quite instrumental in me putting together this project. So a great big thank you to him and also my colleagues as well. I want to start with just a graph that shares a little bit about, from the Learning Policy Institute, the school job vacancies by state. And apologies, it's a little hard to see, but Alaska here is the highest across all states. And this is not to say anything besides that we sort of have this common narrative that we want to keep and recruit teachers. And so first, I'm going to talk about a little bit of my previous research. So this is pension generosity. So this is a policy that happened in 2008. It comes out of the Non-Foreign Area Retirement Equity Assurance Act. It's a mouthful. And what the federal government did is for all federal workers in Alaska and Hawaii, they gave 25% better pensions. Okay, that's a large sum of money. That's about maybe $100,000 extra when you retire collectively across your retirement years. And they rolled this out incrementally over time until 2013 when all of the federal workers had higher rates of pensions. This graph shows Alaska and Hawaii compared to all other states for annual quits. And what this says to me is that when that policy rolled out, when there was 25% better pensions, you can see directly year over year a decrease in job quits for the federal workforce. And so this is just reaffirming previous economic literature that's already been documented, that better compensation in the form of pensions leads to people sticking around. So this next piece comes from Noah and I. We worked a little bit on this question, thinking about this defined benefit versus defined contribution transition back in 2006-07. So the first piece, and unfortunately, you cannot see the gray bars. I did not realize that would be, but the solid bar here represents our modeled defined benefit, and this dash bar represents our modeled defined contribution benefit. What you can't see, and I apologize for this, is that the error bars around the defined contribution are quite large. And this is just due to the fact that it relies on market returns. And so what we really wanted to say is that given this uncertainty or this risk in the portfolio, what would happen to the retention and recruitment of teachers in Alaska? Okay, and so this is just looking at all of teachers, so any employee in the teacher retirement system, looking at the count of hires over time. And so on this x-axis, it's the cohorts. It's what year you were hired in, and so what plan you're going to be in. And this dotted line represents when there was the transition to the defined benefit. Okay, so everything to the, to the defined contribution. So everything for all the workers to the right, they were enrolled in the defined contribution, and all the workers to the left were enrolled in the defined benefit. And so the first thing we asked ourselves is, well, what happened to sort of the measures we might think about, things like, well, experience and age. And so the first thing we looked at is, well, did we see a change in the age of those who were hired? We actually were kind of surprised, and we didn't see much of an impact, maybe about a 1% change. So those individuals who were enrolled into the defined contribution maybe marginally changed. There's maybe slightly differences in age, but overall, we don't find evidence that there's a change for those who are being hired. The next piece is we looked at salary at entry. The reason we looked at salary at entry is because things like experience in your education go into your salary. And so if it was the case that we saw workers with less experience or lower education, we would expect that there would be a significant drop at the threshold right when this defined contribution rolled out. And we find marginal effects potentially, but largely we don't see an effect right when that policy turned on. And so to go back to this piece, we didn't see large changes in recruitment. And the question we asked ourselves next is, well, what happens when we let this policy experiment play out for 9 years? What happens to these cohorts? You know, in 2000, there was 1,000 people. In 2006, there was about 900 people. And we wanted to see how many of them stuck around 9 years later, 14 years later. And so what we did is we looked at each of those cohorts 9 years later. And I think the first thing we want to make sure we acknowledge is that there's been clearly a decreasing amount of retention in the teacher system. That in 2000, the cohort had approximately about 50% of people stick around. But by 2013, that cohort has approximately 33% sticking around. So over the time, we're seeing decreasing amounts of retention for our teacher system. I think the thing that was very stark to us that we were surprised by is that this 2006 cohort behind was in the defined benefit system, and this 2007 forward was in the defined contribution system. And so we've been particularly interested to understand, well, why didn't we see such a large level change when these teachers were enrolled in the defined contribution? And so we fast forwarded a little bit more, and we looked at 14 years, and we still don't see any particular changes in the retention across the two. The piece that we're particularly interested to continue to study and research is what happens at year 20, year 30. The things that we can't observe, which is when people are retiring and having to think about their defined contribution, their defined benefit, the security in that, and sticking around for another year or so. And so that's the piece that we cannot speak to, that we would love to speak to and get more information about. So at this point, where we're working towards is thinking about that. I do want to say quickly a thank you to all my colleagues for all their help with this. And then if there's other particular questions, some other particular education policy that ICER has been rolling out. So thank you guys for your time.
You can use this, or you can just.
I think we'll just use this here.
Okay.
Well, thank you all for being here. My name's Justin Mack. I'm going to start my timer here so I don't go over. I like the 9-minute format. I appreciate it. So thank you very much. I was hired as a firefighter 14 years ago under the Tier 4 system. I've seen the impacts firsthand. This talk today is not a spreadsheet talk. It's about people and the services that our communities count on. The last class hired under the Tier 3 plan at the Anchorage Fire Department, they lost 3 people to a pre-retirement separation. The first class in the Tier 4 plan lost 10. Next class, which was my class, we've lost 12 so far, and it gets worse from there. So retention, the problems are real. And the question was posed earlier, who will pay the price? Who's paying the price now? And I think all Alaskans are paying the price now of this poor system. We sort of get pigeonholed into these two questions of fiscal responsibility or retirement security, as if we had to choose. And I think this is a false choice. We don't have to choose one or the other. The place is doing it right. Follow a simple playbook. Pay the full bill every year, share costs predictably, and use guardrails that adapt to market conditions. Taxpayers get stability, workers, firefighters, teachers, state staff, they get a dependable future. So here's a chart of some of the places doing it right. Different states, same outcome. Apply a disciplined approach, share costs, and add guardrails. The plan absorbs shock, not the individual families. This works for police and fire, it works for teachers, it works for general employees. Employers already spend real dollars. Let's spend them on a design that actually keeps Alaskans here. So this presentation is a series of quotes. It's my way of bringing a few public employees here with me. So I'm a 3rd-generation Alaskan, didn't want to leave without a real retirement path. I went where the security was. A defined benefit retirement means a secure retirement. That clarity comes from That clarity keeps roots in place, people buy homes, raise families, and commit to long careers here. AFD is a top-tier department with a defined retirement. It would be a very hard place to leave. A real retirement commitment is a career anchor. It fosters continuity, mentorship, readiness that cannot be replaced with constant recruiting. This provides stability and efficiency for all Alaskans. Born and raised here, leaving was hard, but the other states offered clear retirement security. Competing states use guaranteed retirement as a recruitment edge. Matching the security closes the gap without having to win every salary battle, and it keeps homegrown talent serving Alaska. People want to live here, and I don't think we need to beat every salary option out there to keep them, but families do need security. 5 years in Fairbanks, expected to retire there, but without an adequate plan, I moved to a department that had one. This is the we train, they take problem. Alaska is a public safety training ground for the rest of the country. A defined benefit retirement locks in the investment we've already made. Fewer vacancies, more experience, stronger service. Without a defined benefit system, it's hard to attract new educators. And when we do, we don't keep them for very long. Schools need continuity. A secure retirement helps classrooms by stabilizing staff through the early years so students see the same faces, especially in hard-to-fill roles in rural districts. I never planned to leave Alaska. When I compared offers, the retirement was the deciding factor in moving to Washington. In a tight labor market, a reliable retirement income is a tiebreaker. It simplifies long-term planning, healthcare, mortgages, caring for parents, and it's a promise people can build a career on. The work is physically and mentally demanding. A defined benefit plan makes a career and a safe exit possible. So high-risk jobs, high-stress jobs need a predictable finish line. That's the exchange for a career serving Alaskan communities. I left Alaska for Washington. There I earn more, and just as important, I'll retire with a full pension. So pooled investing means lower fees, professional management. Dollar for dollar, that delivers more retirement income than do-it-yourself accounts. Another reason competitors win our talent. After nearly a decade, my retirement felt too tied to market swings. So a growing family, Tier 4 wasn't realistic. I couldn't contribute enough to ensure retirement and face working for longer than is safe. Just back up here. I think I'm pushing the wrong buttons here. So after nearly a decade, my retirement felt it was too tied to market swings, and I needed stability, not a timing guess. In a pooled system, you don't have to shift the ultra-conservative investing as you age. The strategy stays long-term while your monthly check stays predictable, so people can focus on the job. If I'm giving 25 plus years to a dangerous job, it makes sense to serve where the retirement benefit is stronger on the back end. A defined benefit option rewards long service. It helps managers plan staffing years ahead. That's fewer gaps, that's better scheduling, that's more seasoned teams in the field and in the classroom. So my ask in all of this is to not take my word for it, don't take anyone's word for it here, but to go back into your communities and to ask your fire chiefs, ask your police chiefs, ask your school superintendents, if recruitment and retention is a problem. Ask them if a retirement solution like this House bill will fix that problem. These stories represent $2.5 million in training costs that are leaving Alaska. We train them, we send them out to other states like Washington. We don't have to choose between fiscal responsibility and retirement security. The model's set. The Left 2 plan in Washington has been fully funded since 1977, 100% funded or more. In the last couple of years, they have increased their benefit to retirees. We just have to model what's being done and what's being done correctly across the country. We're 20 years into this Tier 4 experiment now, and I don't think there's any community out there, any community leader who's saying this is the best bang for the buck that Alaska can do. So our obligation is to find a better path and fix this for all Alaskans. Thank you.
All right, while Ross is working on that, I want to thank our presenters. You guys did a great job. Clearly, at least I wish you guys had more time. Great discussion. One thing, when I was at the Department of Law, we did settle with Mercer, and we got $500 million. So unfortunately, the legislature would not fund our outside counsel, so they walked away with over $90 million of that $500 million because they were on contingency. But we did get some of that money back. Well, first question for you, given that you were in the unfair position of going first, just wondering what your response is to some of what Representative Stott,
So I really appreciate my colleague, Representative Stapp, and a great guy, just that so much of what he said isn't true. The information that I shared, go to the Division of Retirement Benefits website, and you will see exactly what the historical funding of PERS was and what it is today. And the future value of money that we lost with Mercer was incredible, the time value of money. And we are still suffering from that emotional choice that was made then that we suffer with today. And it's not my word. It's every one of the governor's commissioners. And the actuary that I was telling you about, those aren't our actuaries. That's the governor's actuary. That's the people that work for the state to keep us safe. They're the ones that are saying House Bill 78 is almost bulletproof. I will say it again. They did not envision a scenario where future unfunded liability will occur. And they did model it. My partner here in crime, if you will, I'm a retired police officer, said that it hasn't been modeled. Ladies and gentlemen, these bills have been modeled for 18 years in the Alaska legislature. These bills are played out in states now that have real success. Not theoretical success, but real success. Well-funded systems that have very low turnover compared to Alaska and are not introducing liability. A lot of what you're hearing is emotional, evangelistic rhetoric that is nice for Facebook, but it's not true. Our current liability today, Representative Stapp, what is right, is between 6 and 7 billion. Historically, in 2014, it was 12 to 14 billion. Are we on the right trajectory with a legacy system? Yes. Is House Bill 78 that legacy system? No, it's an entirely different animal. And it really shouldn't even come up because it is structured so different. It is structured even more conservative than these states that you saw up here that Justin Mack presented. And that is why the state's actuary told the House Finance Committee that in their modeling, because they did model the bill, over 25 years that they're required to, doing recessions and all that plugged in, that they couldn't envision a scenario where it would not stay well-funded, and that it brings with it no unfunded liability from the beginning, and that they can't model a market scenario where it introduces it. That's powerful. That's not us. That's not an advocate saying that. That's the actuary for the state who's responsible to keep us out of trouble and has for a long time. And now we have an ARM board that's working great with our Division of Retirement and Benefits. And we are on trajectory for the old system to pay it off by 2039. And we know that House Bill 78 is very conservative. And we also know with certainty that it is going to help greatly with recruitment and retention. Based on extensive Governor's Task Force teacher research and surveys that have interviewed over 4,000 teachers and exit interviews saying how much that would have impacted their decision to stay. All due respect to Mr. Wilson, who I greatly admire his work at ICER. I would also point out in 2017, ICER did a report that showed we're losing $20 million a year due to teachers leaving the state, that training cost going out the door. I imagine that's considerably more today. There is considerable...
Let's sorry. You want to wrap up and then?
Sure.
All right.
Yeah. Yeah. I think, what's been disappointing to me is unless you have been in this fight historically for a long time. I'm a retired police officer here in Alaska, served all around the state. Answered the call of duty, took a lot of risk, got shot at several times. My colleague here, Mr. Stapp's combat veteran, we know what it's like to answer the call. You go. But when people are willing to do that over time, decades of their life, their risk for us does warrant some risk in return. And if the answer is we're not willing to take any risk, it tells our teachers, like, what do we value? It tells our public safety people, what do we value about your risk? Should we make that a condition of employment, that you only have to answer a call if there's no risk? No. In other words, every retirement plan costs something. Is this a responsible one? Absolutely. And it's the actuaries that are saying that. Okay. It's not a legislator.
Why don't you, Rep. Sev, I'll give you an opportunity to respond, but I also would be
I'll be quick.
Well, hold on, I got a question for you too. Are you satisfied with the status quo? And if not, what reforms would you be willing to entertain?
I'll do my rebuttal first, and I'll answer the question. Okay. Well, look, everything I put up there is cited, folks. Like, for starters, the modeling of our pension liability, that didn't come from me. That comes from our ARM board and Division of Retirement Benefits, and it comes from our Legislative Finance Division. So, I wasn't even around. I wasn't even in this state when we got in this problem, right? So the second thing is bulletproof. Okay, I can prove that's not true. Do you know why? If the plan is bulletproof, you wouldn't have a cap on employee contributions to the plan. That simple. So prove to me that it's bulletproof and go amend your bill and uncap your employee contribution to this plan, because if nothing ever goes wrong, you'll never have to increase it. But we won't do that because we know that it's going to change. Otherwise, you wouldn't protect the employee from taking additional risk. It's that simple. Uncap the employee risk tolerance to this plan by allowing their contribution to go up to 80% of salary if that's what it takes. But you're not going to do that because you don't want to do that. By the way, that'd be terrible if you had to pay 80% of your salary for a benefit plan, okay? We cap it because we know that it's going to change over time. So as far as what we should do, folks, the answer might be a pension. Okay, we might look at Social Security. We might say that's not what we want to do. We might look at putting teachers in SBS or public safety who aren't in SBS into SBS, okay? We might look at enhancing employer contributions to the existing defined contribution plan, i.e. increasing the match. By the way, did you know that if you live here in Anchorage, you pay property taxes, the majority of the property taxes that you pay go to pay the pension obligations of an employee retired as opposed to one who is now working. So if you paid that debt off, you could put way more into their existing retirement plan. But at the end of the day, maybe the pension is the best option. I only say, hey, if we're going to go down this road again, like, we know all the things that went wrong, and it would make sense for us to say, you know what? It might only be $400 million if everything works out over the course of 20 years, like our actuary says, or it might be $1.8 billion. And you know what? If that $1.8 billion cost is worth it to you, then plan accordingly. And you can't do anything wrong if you do that. Like, if you say we're going to make sure that we have $1.8 billion to fund this new benefit plan, then nothing bad happens. Bad things happen when you unfund the plan. Thanks.
So, Justin, this one's for you. Have you had discussions with your members or other firemen about the importance of healthcare versus enhanced retirement pay or more security?
Yeah. So one of the biggest differences in this current proposed plan versus the legacy tiers is there is no medical component. There's an HRA, it's funded at 3%, but under the old system, after 25 years as a firefighter or police officer, it's full medical covered for the rest of your life. That deal is off the table. So it's a huge concern. It forces us to find ways to bargain within our municipality to figure out a solution. So we have negotiated. It's basically a miniature pension for healthcare moving forward for firefighters. We negotiated that at the local level. So instead of going after keeping up with inflation or some other critical things that are needed, we do shift the conversation to look for healthcare as a way to supplement. But that's one of the components that keeps this plan fiscally sound. We don't have an unlimited benefit tied to an unknown percentage. And I think that's probably one of the stronger points to make in this new plan, is that medical is set aside. This is a financial benefit. And what that provides firefighters, police officers, teachers is an opportunity today to look at what their retirement looks like 10, 20, 30 years from now and start that planning today, recognizing that the medical coverage is limited, but we also have an opportunity to plan.
Brock, this one is for you. Have you looked at other states? I imagine you have looked at other states. Is there a particular state that does a good job that you think could work in Alaska?
I think for what we want, the question comes down to there can be several different successful models, first off. I've read about other states that have an entirely defined contribution system and it works for them. The federal government recently switched from an entirely defined benefit to a hybrid defined benefit, defined contribution, and that is what works for them. I think that the question comes down to figuring out what is the employee need and figuring out if we can get the right amount for that employee. So it's really contextual, and I don't know if I can say we should pick up this model from somewhere else and apply it to Alaska. Alaska is a very unique state. And so the best I can say is we have to figure out contextually what works best.
Okay. And many of you may know this, but public employees don't get Social Security. Just wondering how much that impacts the evaluation of other plans. So, Justin, you want to?
Yeah, so there was a study done, and I can maybe ask that this study be sent out. They looked at the likelihood of success under a Tier 4 plan for a public safety member. When we look at, I think most people would agree that Social Security alone would probably be a bad retirement plan. 6.2% from the employee, 6.2% from the employer. And I don't believe Social Security was ever meant to be a all-encompassing retirement plan. I think it's a supplement that's available. When you look at the Tier 4 plan right now, an employee contributes 8%, employer contributes 5%. That's 13%. That's a tad better than Social Security, but still, it's pretty poorly funded. Even the most conservative groups recognize that our current system is extremely underfunded. So this study showed the likelihood of success with no SBS, no Social Security, and a 13% contribution rate between the employer and the employee based on the limited job period for a firefighter or a police officer. And I don't want to misquote, but it was over 75% chance of failure in retirement, which is an eye-opening consideration for anyone who's been on the job for a few years, who's watching their retirement account. It's going up, but it's not going up as fast as inflation and everything else that's going to come with retirement and a shorter career. I can assure you, you do not want 65-year-old firefighters and police officers responding to your call. But I also recognize, as mentioned earlier, there's risk in what we do. We ask our firefighters and police officers to take a significant amount of risk. We ask our teachers to take a significant amount of risk in moving to rural communities away from where they're comfortable and investing in a new community. There's risk involved with that as well. And what we're considering is, is Social Security a good option? We're asking the employer, who's already paying 22%, to now pay 6.2% more on top of that into a system that doesn't do what we need it to do in the form of retention.
Okay. So this question's for you, Rep. Stapp. What in particular did you ask Ledge Finance to model on HB 78 that hasn't been modeled?
Okay, so a few things here, right? So we're going to talk about payroll growth and salary growth. Okay, so the ARM Board's assumptions right now on payroll growth for TERS is 1%, 2% for PERS. Okay, I have our wonderful NEA folks. I'm fairly certain you're going to do a lot better than 1% in salary negotiations with districts, but maybe you won't, right? So that number, if you change that from 1% to 2% or 3%, it dramatically increases the amount of money that you are guaranteeing at retirement over time. So for example, in Fairbanks, we just renegotiated a contract not too long ago. It was 3% per year, okay? So for 3 years. So that's 9% over the course of 3 years. That's 9 years under an arm board assumption, okay, as opposed to 1% per year. So what does that do to the liabilities on the plan? So when I showed you that the liability went from 12.6 billion to 25 billion over the course of 20 years, that's because when our actuary modeled payroll growth, they constantly went back in salary growth, and they constantly went back and updated their assumptions in a way that was adverse to the state, because we constantly paid people more than their assumptions were. That creates liabilities. So under the mechanics of this bill, that doesn't mean that that liability is going to be unfunded, because we have mechanics in the bill that increase the contributions, all right? But when you increase the employer contribution to the plan in a percent of payroll, that increases the cost of the plan. So that's what you want to model. You want to model, hey, like if the bill actually has to do its stuff, what does that look like? And again, if you model your worst case scenario, I modeled 4% payroll growth. Okay, I don't think it'll be that high, but I had Ledge Finance modeled anyways. And the reason I did that is because it takes that cost from around 37 million a year, as Chuck said, and puts it upwards of 90 million a year. Okay. So now you know it's going to be probably anywhere between 37 to 90 million a year, and you can figure out from a legislative perspective, like if we're going to make sure that we have the money to pay for that. Okay, that's how you want to do that stuff. All right, you don't want to do what we've done historically, which is to say where actuary says this number, and when it didn't work out, they get to revise their projections every 5 years, and it's only ever been revised one way. So like the joke I tell people is 3 things are true in life. 1, death. 2, taxes. And 3, your pensions assumptions are always going to go down one way. All right. So we don't have to do that if we want to do this plan going forward. We can actually assess the risk and plan accordingly. Thanks.
So Rep. Kopp, is there anything you can do to change the bill to get Rep. Staff's vote or other votes?
Actually, Representative Stapp is getting very close. I expect we'll probably end up with his support before this is over, actually. So I want to talk about the point that he raised about just uncapping the employee contributions. So right now, that range is 8 to 12%. The actuary said that even a 0.1% increase is going to raise scores of millions, like 20 to 30 million, 20 to 40 million dollars more. And so the adjustments would be very incremental. And they're talking about a bill that they don't even see the levers coming into play to make it safer. They said the bill is so structurally sound, and they were this actuary was getting heat from all 11 finance committee members. They said, we don't see those levers coming into play, but if they do, every 0.1 increment is significant funding allotment. So Representative Stapp says, we'll just raise it just in case we do want it to go to 80% of payroll, which I know he was joking. We're never going to ask employees to pay 80% of their payroll for their retirement. But you want a range that is predictable for employees too. I think that's fair. I think the range is significant. Right now, there's none. That is a significant employee risk-sharing range. It is matched by an employer contribution risk-sharing, and it's matched by retirees not having COLA, but having their inflation proofing go away. So even the old people, the people who have served, retired teachers, retired maintenance workers, retired public safety, they have skin in the game, and not having that inflation proofing, if the plan drops below 90% funded, is one reason why the actuary said this is a very strong plan. And I just don't see that coming into play. So, dear direct answer, John, is if the bill is in the Senate now, if the Senate raised it a little further, then that's the legislative process. Every committee does what it's going to do. I'm confident that we won't need that, but if it happened to bump up a bit, oh well. I do want to make Rep. Stapp happy. I don't know if I'll ever get him all the way, but and I'm not discounting everything he has to say, but I will say this. This bill has been exhaustively studied. and by many different legislators and by many different actuaries. And that's why we speak to it with a confidence level that we have.
So, Professor Brock, this next one's for you. Are there other reasons employees are leaving that you were able to understand or discover?
So there could be several other reasons, and I would not do justice to speak all of them, but, there's been great work that's come out on the teacher retirement and recruitment survey. And some of the other pieces they talk about are salary. I think that's the number one most cited thing that they would like to see to stick around more. Some of them have talked about returning to Social Security. Others have talked about, school quality and thinking about sort of what that looks like for improving and keeping schools functioning. I wish I had more of these off the top of my head, but my colleagues, Diane Hirschberg and Dana DeFeo would both be able to speak to this. I'm more familiar with the pension aspect.
All right. Keep the microphone. Do you want to ask any of the panelists a question?
Not particularly yet.
Oh, come on. Justin, do you want to ask one of the reps?
Yeah, I guess my main question is the current system broken in your opinion? And if we can agree that it's a broken system, then I think it's an opportunity for us to start doing something better. But after 20 years...
Can you define what do you mean by broken?
Failing to do what a retirement system should do in providing security and also at the same time making sure that we retain employees. And that's for staff, if you couldn't guess.
So the study you cited is a perfect example. So if you have employees that don't have SBS and they don't have all the other, supplemental benefit system. So we have had for a long time in the state, we basically have a Social Security replacement called supplemental benefit system. Fairbanks firefighters, for example, aren't in SBS. Okay, so that means the only thing they really got going is that DC contribution, and the amount of money that they're putting away just under the DC employer and employer match isn't enough to get to full retirement, right? So that's why I say when we talk about solutions, how much money would it cost to put everybody into SBS, for example? Who needs to pay that cost, right? And we put it on the municipalities, we put it on the state. All right, what does it look like that the Social Security windfall elimination provision is gone now? Like, what does it look like if we put teachers into Social Security? They can opt themselves in, by the way, or they can opt in by district. But how much money is that, and what does that look like? So there's plenty of different avenues that we can approach to look at enhancing benefit packages for folks, certain segments of the employee groups that aren't getting it done. But other groups in their DC plans, if they have SBS and they have relatively higher wages and they have higher match, they're actually doing fine in their plans, right? So how do you make it more equitable for all the employees? And that's what you want to look at, in my opinion, right? And again, ultimately, you may decide that, hey, you know what, a defined benefit plan is like the best option that we think when we ran all the data. The problem that I have is we haven't bothered to look at any of these alternatives at all. And I've been in the legislature 3 years. And if we're going to make a decision, so, the reason we have tier 4 system instead of like tier 20 is because the Constitution of the state of Alaska says we can't diminish benefit to the retiree. Okay, so that basically makes it a one-door decision. That means once we decide to do something and people opt in, we're locked into that from now until basically the end of time. All right. So if we're going to make decisions like that, and we make a lot of decisions all the time, the legislature people, sometimes we screw things up really bad and we go back the next year and we're like, oh man, that was terrible. Let's fix it. All right. We don't get to do that with this, right? We can only ever do one thing, which is make it better. So before we decide on something, I'm just of the opinion that we should look at all the options, do our comparison. If it makes sense, we should do it. And if it doesn't, we shouldn't. And until we're willing to do that, right, we don't really know what the best option is.
Thank you. Just to follow that up, so there was one bill that Representative Tomaszewski we had modeled in House Finance, and that was a simple increase in employee contributions. And I believe it was only for public safety. It may have been included teachers too, but when we modeled it, it was almost twice the call of the House Bill 78 plan for everybody. So, and plus that impact is to local government. We weren't sure that local school districts and local employers would be very happy about increasing another 6% contribution. And so we decided not to push it after the initial modeling because the plan was more than the $37 million increase per year calls as modeled in House Bill 78. But one thing I wanted to say about the brokenness, Right now, our teachers in rural Alaska are largely filled, those positions are filled by HB1 visas. Those are people with a bachelor's degree that are being hired from the Philippines, other countries that are filling those positions. What is our new immigration policy? $100,000 per HB1 visa. 100,000. What school district in Alaska? I want to remind you that some of our districts, 90% of their teachers are HB1 visa teachers. We will be shutting down school districts. We cannot recruit these people, not in state, and we can't get them up from out of state because we are not competitive. We already have one school district on the Kuskokwim that did not open this year. It is a broken system. It is all over us. Our state commissioners are telling us it's a broken system. Is this a perfect solution? No, but what public policy solution is perfect? We do the very best we can to try to get consensus and then drive at that and then be willing to come back and amend. Now, Representative Stapp is correct. What happens if we get it wrong? We just can't diminish a retirement system. But I'll tell you, this bill has been so studied by actuaries that there is no boogeyman hiding in the closet on this one. And the future legislature could just say we're not letting anybody else in that plan, and we could make a new plan more conservative. So that would be a solution. But our system now, we're struggling. Our Commissioner of Public Safety said he is losing troopers faster than he can hire them. And the strain on the troopers is such that they're working 2 weeks on and 2 weeks off, and they're commuting from Florida. They're commuting from out of state to fill positions. They're not Alaskans. They're up here. We're hiring mercenary public safety. That was unheard of in my public safety days, to come in and fill positions. That's the only way we can hire them, is we got to give them the liberty to live somewhere else. We're losing that investment as a parent, as a contributing member of that community. They're just there to police and go home.
So
I don't think we want that.
why do you think, we heard a lot of anecdotal evidence and obviously from commissioners, but Justin had a lot of his firefighters talking about the importance of a better system. Why do you think HB 78 is a solution, and how do you define success? What's your level of confidence that it will help recruit and retain?
The states that have this similar structure are doing so much better. We are nationally just not competitive. Now, for some reasons, we're geographically isolated from the lower 48, so we can't steal across the border, just go steal somebody from Washington or Oregon. It's like, no, we have a $20,000 relocation cost just to get here. By the way, as you pointed out, John, no Social Security waiting for you, no good retirement, and our pay is below average. Now, that's impressive, right? Not. So it's we know we have to do something. I think you've heard all the panelists say that. I'm confident that House Bill 78 represents a solution that's going to greatly advance where we're at now to a much better position that is going to make us attractive again for businesses and families to come to Alaska and build a life here.
Okay. So for the remaining three, do you want to spend 30 seconds to a minute wrapping up? Rep Stapp, you want to?
Oh, sure.
Okay.
Well, I mean, I'll kind of go back to, if it makes sense, folks, you should do it. And everybody in this room knows that wanting to make good decisions by doing proper modeling and thought actually makes sense, right? So my argument is we should do that. I also think that if you go back and you look at the numbers and you compare ourselves to Tier 3 and what our retention rates were at Tier 3, you probably wouldn't see that big of a difference between Tier 3 and Tier 4 in certain types of segments of the public sector. But we haven't done that either. So like, we can talk about how we compare Alaska to other states, but when I pulled that clip from 2005, you know what Senator Hoffman talked about half that meeting? He talked about how we had a crisis in retention and rural teachers, recruitment and retention, okay? This is not a new issue for Alaska. It's not a new issue for rural Alaska. So if we want to make good decisions, let's actually go back and make the comparisons. And that way I can turn to my friend Chuck, Representative Chuck Kopp here, and I said, you know what, Chuck, you were right and I was wrong. And I vote for the bill. But until we do that type of stuff, what else am I supposed to do, right? I have a fiduciary responsibility to the state, right? I'm 37 years old, right? That means if I screw this up, my kids who are 7, 4, and 2 are going to be paying this just like you are paying on it right now the last time the legislature screwed this up. So again, if it makes sense, let's do it. Thanks.
So I'm going to briefly just remind sort of the beginning of my presentation, which is better compensation leads to better retention. I think that's something that everybody can agree upon. And that was something I highlighted at the beginning, that if we want people to stick around, then we're going to have to pay for it. I mean, that's just something that I think is a reasonable thing to imagine. And I think the next part of that goes into the story of, so this defined benefit, defined contribution. I think each person has their own preferences. There's a large literature that talks about that in economics. And so we need to do what's best for that employee to stick around. And so in this case, if it's a defined benefit, it's a defined benefit, it's a defined contribution, it's a defined contribution. Right now, we're curious to see where the results are for year 20, right? And to see where that takes us. So thank you.
Yeah, well, thank you for being here and thank you for putting this on. I think it's an extremely important conversation to have. And you're right, some of this stuff is anecdotal. I was talking to a friend today. He was hired in 2000. Every single person in his hire class made it to retirement eligibility. That will never happen again under the Tier 4 system. That kind of retention is a thing of the past. When we talk about the contribution rates and we talk about the 8% to the 12%, Washington's Left 2 plan, fully funded since 1977, the employee contribution rate, 8%. Employer contribution rate, less than 6, 5 point something. And the state contribution rate is right around 3. We don't need huge chunks of money. We don't need 80% contribution rates to do it right. And this is a system that's weathered all of the storms over the last 50 years. And not only are they fully funded, they're increasing benefits. You just have to do it right.
Well, why don't we give our panelists a round of applause? They did a fantastic job. I want to thank you all for coming to this event, and wanted to remind you that all the materials, the reports and presentations will be on our website, Ross? Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, we will create an AI summary of the report, and I'll send an email to everyone who attended, and you will also have a copy of the video and the slides afterwards to look forward to later.
Okay. So thanks again for coming. This is a great discussion. Appreciate your attendance.